Hey, what's up guys? I'm Josh and welcome to another review. Today we're going to be talking about the Singxer SA-1, which is a fully balanced Class A amplifier coming in at a price tag of $600. We're going to talk about that. And Oppo's Audio Store did send this out. Singxer has nothing to do with this review, and as always, no one is controlling what I say. All thoughts on my own. Okay, so let's start off with the price point, $600. That's pretty high given today's standard for quality amplifiers of a similar build and specification sheet as this. But let's go over the physical build. This unit is solid. It's not the densest unit that I've ever felt, but if you're used to something like a 789, this is a lot more hefty and it feels of higher quality, including things like the potentiometer, things like that. The switches, they all feel really, really good. The design itself probably looks pretty familiar to something like a 789 or something like an A90. They all kind of basically feature around about the same thing. This one is a little bit different. Instead of having the gain switches on the front, it actually has the gain switches on the bottom, a bunch of toggle switches here that you have to turn on to get the highest gain or the lowest gain. And on the front, it has an impedance switch for your headphones. It also has a switch for your RCA versus your XLR inputs, and your switch between your pre-out and your headphone output out of the front. The unit, like most of these comparable amplifiers, is pretty compact. It fits well on a desk. It has a regular amount of input and output options, and it has a 1990s vacuum power switch on the back. So that's cool. So this is definitely competing in the world of really good measuring amplifiers like this one, solid state amps like this. This does have some pretty impressive measurements. Some of the specifications are like total harmonic distortion numbers that are really, really, really low, comparable to things like the topping 890, which I compared against. The power numbers are like 6.4 watts into 32 ohms. So again, very competitive in this price category. The dynamic range is very impressive. It's 147 dB, which is nuts. And the signal to noise ratio is also very good at 126 dB. The one and only downside about the specs and measurements of this guy is that it's not really price competitive. It's good, and I wouldn't say that it's bad at all. It's just not super price competitive. So something that I'll bring up a lot in this review is this topping A90. This topping A90 has better specifications and better measurements in most categories and costs about $100 less. But it doesn't have some of the characteristics that this does, especially for sound quality, though I think my personal preference is the A90. Now, both the Singxer SA-1 and the A90 suffer from the same problem, and that's competition. You have a lot of competition nowadays. Technically, they're both better than the competition, but the competition gets very close for performance for about half the price. So something like a THX 789, which I assume you knew I was gonna bring up, for half the price, literally has very similar specifications, a comparable sound quality. They're both pretty good. They're different, but they're both pretty good. Given the fact that it's half the price, it's a very appealing option. Currently, it looks like it's out of stock, which is unfortunate, but if you can find that in stock, that is a very, very good deal. And that makes both the SA-1 and the A90 difficult to always recommend to the right people. I think the thing that separates all three of these though is sound quality, and that's what I want to focus on right now. So I use A90 as a reference. I think it has the most neutral sound of anything that I've personally ever heard. It also has specifications and measurements that would support that claim. And I just really enjoy an extremely clear, unbiased sound signature that you get from something like an A90. The 789 compared to the A90 always seemed a little more uptight, a little stiffer in the sound signature. It seemed a little sharper, though it was very, very close. And again, for $300 versus $500, it's a really good deal. This in comparison is the flip side of that. This actually is, in my opinion, a kind of a warm amplifier. And I'm not really sure why, because the measurements are so good. They're so pure for a solid state amplifier, but I get a pretty warm sound signature out of this thing when compared to my A90, just A being back and forth with different types of headphones. I think that this has a little bit stronger bass performance and a little bit less treble forwardness. And it seems not quite as much of a straight line as I would prefer to hear from my amplifier. Now, I think that sound signature, the slightly warmer sound signature, that slightly warmer tilt is going to be appealing to a lot of people. I think that some hardcore, more opinionated people might think that this has something to do with the Class A, and maybe it does. This is kind of beyond the extent of my personal knowledge and willingness to lay claim to anything. I'm just telling you my subjective experience here. I do think that this is a slightly warmer amplifier. Now, while it's not my preferred of the two, it's definitely not bad. And with the right pairings, I actually think it can be really, really, really good. In fact, on one of my favorite pairs of headphones, the Diana V2, this pairing is, I like this better than I like it on the A90. This also is really good with the new LCD5, but when it comes to something like the Elite or the Diana TC or things like an Aria, I really like the A90. I also prefer the A90 for things like IEMS. It's just really sensitive. That brings me to an interesting point on the volume dial. The volume dial seems to be, I don't really want to call it exponential, but it's definitely not linear. But when you're turning this, you get a very slow volume increase in the beginning. And then as you get towards the end of it, it ramps up really quickly. So you'll be like slow, 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 fast. And then you just really accelerate a lot. Now, when you're listening to efficient headphones, this is actually really nice because you have these small increments through a large amount of turning. It doesn't adjust it too much. But when you're listening on more demanding planars, your level of adjustment is very minor, and that's not quite as linear. I think my basic point, what I'm trying to get to, is that with the gain switch settings on something like the A90, where it's got low, medium, and high, and the volume dial is very linear, you can really fine tune any headphone at any gain level, and you can really get to what you want to hear. I think I prefer the gain switch settings on the A90. Dynamic range, while spec performance is very impressive, the subjective experience is also very, very good from it. Things like Final Ascent from the new James Bond soundtrack from Hans Zimmer has this amazing crescendo at the end. It's very, very good. The warmer tilt on something like this, I find a lot of rock to be very enjoyable. Rock can sometimes be mixed a little bit light on bass, I think, and I find this to hit very authoritatively down there. It sounds really, really nice. Now, the tonality is sort of difficult to explain a little bit because it's one of those things where you kind of sense it sometimes when you're switching, and then you go to focus on it and it disappears, like it's vapor. It doesn't seem to have a switch when I really pay attention to it, but then for some reason, I get the sense that it's a little bit different than the A90 tonal wise, especially for voices. It just hits a little bit differently, and I can't quite put my finger on what it is. That's a failing on my part, but I'd rather be safe than sorry with my claims here. It's just, I don't know. There's something a little bit shifted compared to the A90, in my opinion. So as far as my subjective experience goes, I think that this performs really well. It's not my personal preference, but I think that this type of sound signature is appealing to some. It's definitely a little bit harder hitting in the low end than either the A90 or the 789. It's not a drastic change. It's not quite like using EQ. It's just a slight bump. So that will either align with your preferences or it won't. Objectively though, given the A90's performance at $100 less, being objectively, measurably better, and in my personal opinion, a more straightforward sound signature, I think the A90 is the better choice. But personally, I wouldn't complain with either. Okay guys, thanks a lot for watching. Until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off.